Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, joined today by Eugipius, Mr. Lichtmetz, and Mr. Zellner. And very, very pleased that it is so. The subject of our discussion for this stream will be the situation in German-speaking countries. And I hope, in addition to learning about exactly what is going on there, I hope to hear these gentlemen's best guesses as to why it is happening the way it is in these places. There's quite a bit going on with Germany that seems to exceed even the degree of sort of, I don't know, unconscious desire to annihilate entire nations that we see across the West. So yes, I look forward to finding out what's going on and perhaps even glimpsing some of the reasons why. I'm going to skip most of the shilling so that I have as much time with the guests as possible. I do want to ask everyone here to mind your manners in the chat. I don't want to see any kind of hate speech, any kind of nonsense. There's every possibility that we'll get nasty people in here who will attempt to make this all seem much, much uglier than it actually is. So anyone that I have in here who has a wrench that I know, please keep your eyes on what's going on. I just gave a wrench to Rive. And hopefully he can help us keep an eye on what's going on here. Please feel free to kick anyone with maximum prejudice who does not behave themselves. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for being here. Why don't we just move around the circle here from me, and everyone just take a moment to introduce yourselves and let everybody know at the outset, as we will do again at the end, where they can follow you, where they can find out more about you. Shall we start with Eugipius?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I am just a blogger. You can find me at eugipius.com. That's all there is to say about me.
Well, excellent. Thank you. Herr Lichtmetz?
Wow, how modest of you, GPS. So I'm Martin Limas. I'm an author of several books, also a blogger. I'm associated with the so-called New Right. Is a label I would accept with certain reservations. And I'm also a distant cousin of the other Martin. I mentioned this because nobody knows.
Well, yeah, I had no idea. And who is this other Martin of whom we hear?
The one who will introduce himself the next. Yeah,
exactly. I'm an Austrian activist and author, identitarian, co-founder of the identitarian movement in Austria. And yes, in Austria we're all kind of related because there are a lot of mountains, and there was it was less about migration and circulation there. So Martin is a distant cousin of mine. Yeah,
genetic bottleneck.
He makes it look like we are Deliverance style hillbillies with incestuous, genes.
But Martin, that's very dangerous, because I think it's really not that public knowledge, and might be even in the headlines tomorrow in Austria or Germany. I hope you don't also get a travel ban, like a family travel ban. Yeah. But I also want to say I'm very pleasure and honored to be here, and I hope we have an amazing discussion tonight.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. Eugipius, had you wanted to say something?
No, not at all. No, I just left.
Oh, okay. Well then, so Eugipius, you can certainly find him on X or Twitter, whatever the hell it is. Lichtmetz
you must check his Substack of Eugipius.
Yes, indeed. His Substack is his primary spot. He publishes all kinds of great stuff. And Lichtmetz is over on Telegram. I believe there's an official channel. Is there anywhere else other than in old-fashioned printed media where people can find you, Lichtmetz.
But it's stop saying that. Just say Martin. Also, I say
Yeah,
Martin
but if I say
too, or
Martin,
whatever.
okay,
Yeah.
I'll say Neofolk Martin.
I always feel like you're giving me an electroshock when you say Lichtmetz.
I'm also liking Neofolk. You know, that doesn't work. I'm also a fan of Neofolk, so you have to come up with something else.
Oh shit! All
Martin the First and Martin the Second, I suggest.
I'll be
Yes,
Martin
but
the
you bet-
First.
Okay. Well, if you're the elder,
yeah, I'm just the elder. That's all. The other Martin is the more famous one, the notorious celebrity.
Infamous.
But infamous, yeah. One of the most
Notorious, yeah.
dangerous, notorious,
So,
one of the most dangerous people on this planet. You know,
One of the
banned,
only
I don't
people
know.
we have figured out how to deport. I don't know, to at least exclude. Yeah.
yes, it
He's
might
the
have had
only
something.
person. Yeah, he's the only
It might
person
have had
in
something to
Germany
do with that
taught
yellow
us
wig.
deporting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So there's a rumble for Zellner, and there is a Telegram as well. And you're on Twitter now, Martin too, are you not?
Yes, I am, and occasionally, so when a speech gets busted by the police or I get deported, then I sometimes also tweet in English. So whenever something interesting happens.
Yeah, I've also noticed that you have an English Telegram channel devoted just to stuff in English as well. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this, we were talking about this behind the scenes. You know, we don't know in the Anglosphere. There's a definite gap in our knowledge of what's going on in the German-speaking countries and in French-speaking countries as well. And I'd like to address that at some point if I can find the right people, because we're not talking to each other as much as I think we could and should. So the basic thrust of this, I mentioned at the outset, I just want to find out what the hell is going on. And because of what little I know about what is going on, for example, deindustrialization, a disastrous war in Eastern Europe, growing economic chaos, crazy inflation as well, from everything I've heard. I'm hoping that we can learn something about the why of it. And so I guess I would leave it to you gentlemen, whichever one of you wants to start. Maybe we could start with Germany, since we have only one German here. I know Martin Zellner is very knowledgeable about what's going on in Germany as well, but perhaps we can get the boots on the ground perspective just to start in terms of what's going on in Germany from Eugipius.
All right. Well, both Martins are also very well informed about events in Germany, so they should also speak. But I don't really know where to begin. So much is happening, but Germany is really at an unbelievable level of cockedness right now. I was just reading news, and Sikorski, the former defense minister of Poland, gave this interview to Polish media about his infamous tweet about Nord Stream. After Nord Stream was blown up, Sikorski tweeted that it was so great. He thanked the United States for this, and he explains that now he explains his tweet, which he deleted. It was because the US apparently had foreknowledge of Ukraine blowing up Nord Stream or something, and he's happy that the US didn't do anything to stop the attack. And this is just received, even repeated by German media, including some state media sources, as that's just okay. It's just unbelievable to me that a country would accept an attack like this on critical infrastructure and just let it happen, never ask questions, just take it up the ass, this unbelievable cockedness of Germany right now is something I even 20 years ago would have been unimaginable, and is just a thing to behold.
Yeah, I want to just jump in very quickly. I think your suggestion was very, very good, Eugipius. Why don't we just approach it Germany first, but with all of you speaking? You're quite right. All of you are following it very, very closely. So, yeah, let's take it like that. That is a question. There's the business with deindustrialization, of which the brazen attack on German and Russian infrastructure there is one example. There's also, shutting down nuclear power plants in order to open up coal-fired ones. I mean, it's appalling to me. I really cannot understand it.
Yeah, well, so who should speak next? I
Yeah.
mean, everybody of us gets a lot to say. We should also clarify that certainly in Austria we are not isolated from Germany. In fact, we follow Germany very close. We often go to Germany. Martin now not so often anymore in the foreseeable future, I guess. So this is certainly something that is concerning us. And certainly also, the history of Austria and Germany, Austria as a separate entity, which is considered something different from the rest of Germany, is a relatively new thing. So we are distinct. I mean, Germany consists of very different, distinct parts. There's lots of diversity within Germany. So Eusebius, I believe, lives in Bavaria, which is something very different than you live in Saxony or when you live in Berlin or so. And certainly we observe very similar pathologies. And one thing I would say about Austria, that we are slightly less cucked for historical reasons. We sort of managed to get shift all the blame to the bigger Germans for World War II and other things. And for that reason, this guilt tripping didn't go as deep as there. But it's certainly also an issue,
Yes.
and it has gotten worse the longer the war is away, from the present. So
I think
probably I'll
it's
let
very.
Martin say something now. Yeah.
Let's go a step back in history, because I think it's very interesting for people who are not so familiar with Austria and Germany. There was the Moscow Declaration in 1943. It was actually done by the Allies to troll Germany, at this time, and they declared Austria as the first victim of Hitler, Nazi Germany. And this time, obviously, all the Nazi officials in Austria as dishonoring and a disgrace. But then after the war was lost by the Axis, then the Austrian politicians who were in the concentration camps and came back from exile, communists, but also Christian conservatives, they took this Moscow Declaration and said, okay, we are also winners of the war. Austria is not a loser of the war, and we want to be treated like a winner state because we were the first victim, like Czech Republic and others. And then the Allies said, oh, well, that also doesn't really work. And then it was a very Austrian solution. But in the end, the Austrian state was created as a neutral state with a distinct national identity and everlasting neutrality, and also without this process of what you call denazification in Germany. So this process of totally guilt-tripping a population. And that's why I think in Austria, you have a very distinct national identity now, a bit like in Switzerland. But going to Germany, I think if you look at the issue economically, demographically, ideologically, Germany is just the avant-garde of self-destruction worldwide. It's the epicenter of anti-European, anti-white hatred. And that's why I also see that there's a big potential in Germany, because it's this avant-garde, and I think it will crash very hard. And at the same time, we also have political parties like the AfD, a political movement like the New Right and New Patriotic movement, which is getting so strong and so big that it's very hard to completely shut it down with repression. So I see an upcoming crisis. We can talk about these issues maybe in depth, about the baby bust, the demographic issue, then about deglobalization and about the new war economy globally, for which Germany is totally unfit. I call it the old sick trans man at the Rhine, and
Wow.
it's a very tough time for Germany. And then you have the self-inflicted German Sonderweg of deindustrialization, of green policy, and obviously the transatlantic circles, there's a lot of chaos coming for Germany, geopolitically, economically, and the demographic situation we are right now is just a perfect storm. I want to finish this introduction with a quote from Karl Kraus. He once said it about Austria, but you can say it about Germany. And now I forward it to the better English speakers, Eugipius and Martin Lichtmes. You have to translate it. I said in German.
I know what's coming.
Deutschland
I know
ist
what
eine
you want to say.
Anstalt für den Weltuntergang. You have to translate that.
Well, it's a Versuchsanstalt. What would you say, GPS? It's like a experimental, a laboratory. It's a laboratory for the end of the world. No, where you already test the end of the world.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to, there's part of this background, and this is something that my friend Academic Agent talks about quite a bit, and we argue with each other. Part of the background, though, certainly, he's quite right in asserting that, there's all along with the Marshall Plan, there was an absolutely thorough, shall we say, a program of denazification and an attempt to create sort of, new Germans along Anglo-American liberal models. And so that's certainly a part of this. There is also the quite apparent aspect of what gets called the global American empire. I like to think of it as the global Anglo-American empire, but AA and I argue about that. Basically forcing its will upon Europe in a number of respects. But in my view, and all of you certainly know more about it being there, in my view, that is a heuristic of limited value because it fails to take into account the elites in Germany and Austria, and of course across Europe more broadly, who are not being forced to do this. Now, I'm not suggesting that AA thinks that everyone is, simply forced, but I think that we have to take it, or I would imagine that we have to take into account the forces, the parties, the factions within these countries who are very much behind what's being done. And so I wonder if you guys can talk about that aspect. Certainly much of this is imposed, through financial coercion. I mean, as many people have pointed out, many of these European countries are in effect occupied by, American military forces. But in addition to your thoughts on that aspect, the force and the coercion, perhaps you can tell us more about the groups there, if indeed I'm correct in imagining this, who are very much for what is happening and their own motivations. How could they possibly imagine that what they are doing could be helping these countries?
Well, okay, who should answer? Maybe I say something now. I mean, everybody of us can say. Everybody can say something to this now. Well, the replacement or the reeducation of the elites after World War II was certainly a fact, and it's decades ago, and it installed a sort of system which is now completely internalized. So when I look at German politicians, I don't see any reason to force them for anything because they already know what to do. They are already obeying their inner American because this is what they, I think, honestly believe in, if you ask me. And things may be a bit different in the eastern part of Germany. I mean, this should be mentioned that there was a different kind of, also a kind of reeducation, Soviet communist style, but they did not so much guilt tripping because they claimed that we are the good Germans now, we are the anti-fascist Germans. And the capitalist Germans, they have remained fascists, in fact. And this is also showing in the more nationalist mentality of the eastern parts of Germany until today. So today in Eastern Germany, there are more votes for AfD, party is much stronger. And this, I think, has to do historically with this split. So the communist occupation was far less harmful than the American one. But certainly also in Eastern Germany, the same types of elites are there who follow the same ideology. And in my opinion, they're not forced at all. They sincerely believe in what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, there's the cultural milieu and the backdrop of the entire Americanization that happened after 1945. In addition to that, there's specific forces that are very hard to locate, understand exactly why the Greens, for example, are such dark Atlanticists is very hard to pin down. Who pays them or what exactly their incentives are is, for me, always difficult to understand. It's obviously the case that East Germany, if you look at East Germany and you compare to the West, you understand exactly what the cultural influence gets you. But the West has something a little bit in addition to all of that, and it's I don't know. It's a mix of philanthropic organizations, these globalist international entanglements, and so forth, which cause, for example, a phenomenon like Annalena Baerbock, who is just a total mouthpiece for, as a foreign minister, a total mouthpiece for American foreign policy positions. It's there's both the cultural explanation, but there's something in addition to that. It's mysterious.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's more than just being pressured from the outside, because if you look at it, I call Germany the epicenter of this ideology. I mean, it's hard to pin it down. I would call it like linksliberal, left-wing liberal universalism, and but this is a global ideology, obviously, and to say it's just paid by certain hedge fund managers, and it's just post hoc creation of the elites. I think that's misleading. I think those people, those hundreds of thousands who protested in Germany with the slogan of "Never Again," they really strongly believe in that. So I think you just have these globalists have just created in Germany, just like the communists did in the GDR, a clique of people who really strongly believe in this universalistic ideology. But at the same time, I think they also still need, in times of crisis and of war, look at the blowing up of Nord Stream, they need some kind of direction, sometimes force. And if this direction and this commands, if they stop coming from overseas, maybe on a Trump presidential campaign and then a different foreign policy from Trump, I think these elites will very quickly lose their orientation. So I think they need an ideological and at some point also geopolitical orientation directives. And if they don't have it, I mean, look at those people, at those faces, they are not that intelligent. I think they very quickly will lose their way.
No, I agree. And you see the very panic in German politicians' faces whenever they're asked, what about the Trump presidency? What if he's reelected? There's rage and also confusion and anger, as if they're, the satellite in which they're being beamed, these policy positions will somehow go offline or something, and how disastrous that would be for them, or how they'll have no answers suddenly. It's a real anxiety in German politics. Another point I'd add is that because Germany got in on the ground floor of this guilt regime, we have this cornerstone position. We were the first ethnicity that was guilty for crimes against humanity, and there's a perverse national pride in Germany about that, and this is why people get very angry with you if you talk about the guilt cult or anything like that. It's very sort of inverted patriotism that we have achieved in this way, and I don't know how to uproot it. It's very, very perverse and noxious.
Especially if you think about it, guilt is very damaging, but it also gives you a very strong identity. And if you're a young German at the moment looking for a German identity, the only thing that's offered to you in university is guilt.
Absolutely, yeah, that's totally correct. Yeah, exactly.
And I can really recommend you to read an article by Professor Dr. Ulrich Schmidt-Denter. He's one of the most important psychiatrists and psychologists for young people in Germany. And after his retirement, he wrote an article, a paper, the effects of Holocaust education to young Germans with no migration background. It's just 20 pages long. And maybe you know it. I've been linking it and try to popularize it, but everybody keeps to seems to keep ignoring it in the German right, because it's basically, I would say, the corpus delicti, and really shows how systematically every young German generation is broken mentally. He calls it a de-identification that's taking place with their own nation, and the only way to re-identificate with your nation again is by joining the priesthood of this guilt cult.
Exactly. It's why any attempt to question this, any suggestion at all, this is some sort of bizarre para-religious system that should be questioned, that this causes such outrage in ethnic Germans, because it's a patriotic identification. It feels almost anti-nationalist. It sounds crazy to suggest, but that's how it works.
It's folkish. It's very folkish, because obviously it has a lot to do with your heritage. And now they're facing a huge issue, geopolitics again interfering with the Middle East conflict, because you have hordes of young migrants who have no connection to this ideology, to this historic narrative, and they now all are very worried. It's crazy, how do we transmit this ideology? How do we have a translation of this idea to this young generation of migrants? Very interesting. And in a way, a lot of people are criticizing now for the first time mass migration and population replacement. They do it because they think it might become a danger to Israel if Germany becomes Islamized. So it's a very crazy proxy patriotism that's taking place right now in Germany. So to understand the German soul at the moment, it's a very messed up place.
Yeah, I can add a few things to this as well. I mean, it's not only that the German elites are unable to think in terms of self-interest, they are pursuing an active anti-self-interest. This is the reverse situation, the reverse patriotism, the reverse identity. And ironically, what Martin mentioned about the psychiatrist study, this kind of mentality and education does create an ethnic division, because you cannot guilt trip migrants or children from migrants in a way you can guilt trip ethnic Germans. At the same time, there is an ideology prevailing in Germany that forbids you to make a distinction on ethnic terms. So you are supposed to think that if you have a German passport, you are German, and that's it, and there's no other conception of the folk, of the people, of the state. And this is a huge thing in the question, what is branded as far right or as extremism. And by now, it's simply enough to state that there is a difference between German ethnicity and German citizenry and German statehood. And this denial of German ethnicity is based in many ways on this guilt tripping cult. But at the same time, this cult creates a mental division, between migrants and ethnic Germans. So there's something really, really odd going on here. And it's also certainly something that this guilt thing gives people a meaning. It gives them a meaning in their lives, and this is important for them. I never tire of saying that people always need a kind of religion, also even if it's a kind of crypto religion. And this is also the way I understand the role that the phantom of Nazism plays within German politics and the German collective consciousness. I mean, whenever there's a political issue, there are, I would say, sincere hysterias being triggered. We had an example here with the other Martin present. Probably you have heard the story when there was a so-called secret conference near Potsdam where Martin was talking about remigration, and there was this scandal being created where the thing was absurdly compared to the Wannsee conference, and it just was enough to throw this word as a trigger into the public discourse. And it worked, that people actually believe this phantom of the Third Reich is there. It's just around the corner. It's 1993 again. It's always 1993. You always have to fight against it. You have to prevent it. You have to have the lesson from back then that Nazis get democratically elected. This is why you have to stop AfD in the name of democracy and all that kind of thing. So this religion always requires a devil, and in a bigger picture, the whole universalist, globalist, one world idea, whatever you name it, it also needs a sort of counter image, a sort of shadow, a sort of devil that you can always invoke when people doubt whether you're leading them to something good. And this is, of course, the specter of Nazism, which is not just in Germany prevalent, but is a sort of international thing. I mean, it's even in Russia. Russia uses it as a bogeyman. It's a universal bogeyman that's there, and certainly in Germany it plays emotionally a stronger role. So this is why I always say they need it. They need the bogeyman. They have a need to cling to this idea about the Nazi phantom ever ready to pop up and rise again. Because it gives them also an orientation. It makes them help understand what's going on. Of course, they do not really get it because it's a distorted lens through which they look at things. And I increasingly find when I look at it, they actually do believe what they believe in, even if to us on the other side, it seems completely absurd. You feel like you're confronted with groups of maniacs that project the film onto you. And I think one reason why Martin creates so much hysteria is because he can serve as a sort of projection screen for this kind of complex. You can pin it on him, and then you get all these very strange overreactions. So there's a sort of psychological base here. There's an ideological base, a psychological base, and a crypto-religious base and historical base as well.
Yeah,
Many
I think
things work together here.
And quite cunningly, these many things work together, because I'm constantly looking at what I call the new priesthood of them that know, instead of wearing like a black tunic with a white collar, they wear a white coat, and of course they, in the various versions of them, speak their own kinds of dog Latin. The lawyers who still speak the vestiges of Latin, the economists who, if it's not Latin, are speaking some sort of half intelligible language that lay people cannot follow. The psychiatrists and the rest, and instead of administering to the soul, they administer to the body. And you see this entire sort of public health therapeutic state priesthood apparatus, what I call a priesthood apparatus, appear. And again, they don't wear white collars, they just wear white coats. And of course, they call themselves professional, from the old idea of to profess, to hold forth, to promote a given faith. But your point about the need for an adversary is quite important as well. The literal meaning of Satan is the adversary, and we know that life itself is defined to some extent based on the idea that you respond to stimulus. And I'm no B.F. Skinner, but it does seem that there is more value in the stick in terms of a stimulus than there is in the carrot. And certainly when you have this quasi-religious structure and you have this primordial Satan, that goes back to the beginning of our current era, which many have argued begins academic agent. In fact, the whole idea of this boomer truth regime. We shouldn't have AD anymore. CE as a designator for the beginning of time starts in 1945, and the great Manichaean figure that we must all react to is this terrible mustache man. Well, what do any of you have further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wanna summarize it a bit. I think you mentioned the therapeutic state by Gottfried, and I think one of the most important revelations of his book, Multiculturalism, the Politics of Guilt, is that with this ideology of guilt, for the first time again, we have the unification of throne and altar. So there's a real ideology, a real religion, also professed by the churches, in a way giving legitimacy to the political powers. It's a real historic block after Gramsci. It really works very well. It's very stable. So I think also it either could be a reformation, like a new Luther, or somehow we find this magical word, we find this political solution answer that touches their hearts, and in a way goes around this programming, or it really needs another downfall. And the problem with the German mentality, and we can say this as Austrians because we have also kind of an insider and outsider perspective, is when you look at Germany, very often when they had an idea and an ideology, they stuck with it very strongly and really were very, very hard in enduring physical pain and disaster and sticking to this ideology. And then it really needed a total downfall for a change. So it will be changed by design or by disaster. And I hope that it doesn't need too much disaster for this big historic block of guilt and self-hatred to end. But it definitely needs to end because if we don't overcome this anti-German identity politics, there will be no pro-German migration politics.
And was it you who mentioned recently the idea of escaping forward, this German idea? I heard this recently. Perhaps it was you. The idea that when you're confronted with the trouble, you escape forward, even though everything's falling apart. You throw your last energy into it. So perhaps we need to escape forward out of this, which means they'll just basically drive into a brick wall.
Maybe, yes. I mean, what I'm talking about is like a stratagem, like the real strategy, but I would say like an idea of what I call repression accelerationism. So I think demasking the system, making it more and more authoritarian and totalitarian is good. And we go from a systemic society that has no normative integration or ruling ideology to a society which ruling ideology becomes more and more tangible and visible. So we move from an anti-fragile system to a hardened system, which is hurtful at first, but it also becomes in a way breakable. And obviously for all the listeners from the German Verfassungsschutz, I mean a democratic revolution of thought and of minds. And with system, I don't mean the government, the parliamentary system, the structure. I mean this government and this anti-democratic globalist ideology that has, in my point of view, taken the system hostage. So I think I see all these acts of repression, whether it's trying to ban the AfD or cracking down of patriot movements, banning me from entry, it's a sign of total weakness, a lack of authority, and I see all those things as good signs.
No, I would only second that. I've always said that we have to make the system more brittle by causing it to shed its democratic liberal trappings and act in more overtly authoritarian ways against us. The more it does that, the more it loses its various insulating illusions and becomes in certain ways less flexible and more vulnerable. So it must be made more brittle. That's very important. The only other point I would add to the wise remarks is that I think the entire mid-century mythology is a very clear inverted version of Christianity. So there's no real salvation, although there's an original sin. There's sort of antichrist figure. There's no Christ figure, but there's an antichrist figure. And his second coming is not to be hoped for, but to be feared. And it's always on the verge of happening. There's always a potential antichrist rising up from the ground, and there's always a second, mustache man happening somewhere. This is to be feared and warded off, and it's a very pathological, bizarre, deviation of Christianity.
I think it's also a legitimation of power. To say we need this system we have now in order to not have a second coming happen, not to let the dragon be defeated, rise up again.
Yes.
And because they lack any other legitimations at this point.
Of course, everything has to be terrible, everything has to suck and be awful, just so we can ward off the return of the Antichrist. That's the only reason why. So we're poor, everything, eggs cost 12 euros an egg and everything. But, it's all because of the Antichrist to keep him in the ground.
On the positive side, the regime, let's call it like, just doesn't have much positive to show. It didn't create utopia. It creates much more and more trouble, and people see it. People can realize this trouble, especially with the multicultural issue. And of course, this becomes a vulnerable spot the regime doesn't want to have addressed. I mean, again, I am thinking here in somewhat psychoanalytic terms, and there is some kind of complex that must not be touched, because it's true. And it's repressed. It should not be talked about. And then when you touch it, you get these very hysterical reactions. And in order to justify them, you need the bogeyman, because the great, nice promises, I mean, nobody really believes in them anymore.
Yes.
Question, Archipius, did you read Sifalis Buch Epochenwechsel?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Yeah, because that's what you say. Like, it's like it really reminded me on his obviously read it, on his analysis when he says that the German people is still a rejected people living in the old covenant, and Hitler is Adam, but no, Jesus came to revoke him.
Yes,
and,
I think about this all the time. Yes, of course, yes.
Perfectly described by him,
It's
and also
totally
Martin
right, yeah.
Limas in his book Saving the World, he also described it very
Yes.
well.
Yes.
But I think became very clear if you look at Angela Merkel, 2015, wir schaffen das. It directly said,
Yes.
now finally the world will see us Germans differently. But I also have to say something. Okay, this ideology is very decadent, and I think it only works when there's no material pressure. I think replacing a population so fast in its own country only works when at the same time you have so much bread and circuses that even the normal worker can drive to Mallorca, the Germans' favorite holiday island, once or twice a year, So I really think, okay, it's a very strong ruling ideology, but it also worked in the most prosperous time of peace, in a semi-like end of history time, and it did not stand the test of real endurance and real hardship after 1945. So that's also something you have to take into consideration. And now, for the first time, this ideology is really tested. Are people really wanting to suffer for this ideology, because it also was a very easy time for the baby boomers. There was no real test of history. There was no real hardship. And so it was the ideal time for this crazy and absolutely irrational and anti-political ideology to grow. That's also, and again, Sifale, he needs to be translated to English. He describes the German BRD as a post-political island floating in an ether of non-political fluid. And this is changed right now. And I think the test of geopolitics and of hardship, which is coming right now, this ideology will break apart because there's nothing to offer to people. It doesn't fill our tanks. It doesn't make our apartments warm. It doesn't make our streets safe. And you see Potsdam, and also my book, Remigration and the AfD, we have clear propositions to make the streets safe, to fill the tanks of the people and make their flats warm. Sorry for my political propaganda speech, And their only answer was never again. So the only thing they have to offer, the angry farmers, the angry Germans, even the angry migrants, they want cash. They don't want ideology. They don't want a demonstration against the far right, And the only thing they have to offer is this ideology, which is getting weaker and weaker. So I think we're going to see the downfall of this ideology. And thank God they're so crazy. They're so full of themselves that they don't get this. And what they're doing in response to this natural opposition that's coming up, they're increasing the guilt tripping. They're increasing the persecution of right-wingers, even so that they're interrogating and arresting a 16-year-old girl at school for posting a Smurfs meme.
Yeah, so
sorry, can I say something? I beg to differ a bit here. First, of course, the idea is good to look at it through the lens and say this ideology is a sort of luxury. This is what Martin's saying. As in many ways, liberalism is a sort of luxury in itself, made possible by the Industrial Revolution and the welfare and the material welfare it created. This is why you can have it, certainly. And also, yes, it's true. It was all quite easy for the boomers and the generation that followed. It's even extremely easy today to resist against the Nazis because you're on the majority of the government. You have the government, the media behind you, and the Nazis are not so. If you look at them, are not that Nazi and also not that dangerous. So it's also, this has become a very easy thing. But I do think people need ideology. Certainly in times of crisis and of material problems, they tend less so because they just need to survive. But ideology is something very important to keep people together, to give them a meaning in life. And I don't see this hardship coming, in fact, too soon, because even though we have some kind of loss of quality in many respects, and maybe it's more expensive to pay for your warm apartment, and so I rather see that this welfare, this well-living is pretty stable, much more than you might think. And I think we are far away from getting into a real hardship where you don't care about guilt-tripping religions anymore. So I wouldn't share the optimism here that this is happening too soon.
Well, it's clear anyway, I think, that there's a ruling ideology that is formed within the circles of sort of confined, urbanite, upper middle class, green voter bubble, and it's very detached from practical concerns. And this is kind of a historical, I think it's historically unique. I don't think this has really happened before. And I really differentiate different eras, but I think the present ideology is very much a post-1990 aberration of what was already an aberration of liberalism after 1945. So we have like liberalism cubed or squared or something, and is very much an inapplicable, prosperity-dependent tumorous growth. I agree that there's ideology is important for ethnic identity and for any kind of nationalism, of course. But what we have now is just not very usable. The how long it can last and how fragile it is, I don't know. I think it's suggestive. It's already having serious problems. That it's in fact quite fragile, at least in its current form. But perhaps it can break down, or I don't know, moderate its demands a little bit and still survive for some decades yet. I'm not too optimistic about the future, to be honest.
And I also want to stress, my witness is Habermas. He didn't say many intelligent things, but one thing he really understood is that the binding myth, like the only real core of the ideology in liberalism is the promise of growth and prosperity. He called this way of life as the ideology in the true form today. Also the aesthetics of the commodification, but it's not only wealth, it's a growth of wealth. It's the promise of eternal growth and being better off and growing. And even when the system doesn't grow anymore for a while and it stagnates, it already creates a brutal demand. And in a way, I think it's crazy, but it's maybe die Liste-Identität. So this economic crisis will have worldwide, and I think it's undeniable it will happen. You don't need to be a crash prophet. Will create more potential for change in the countries who had replacement migration. Because, for example, in Japan, young people in Japan, they are completely overworked. They have no time for any political activism and change. And even if there's a economic crisis, there will not happen much. But with this masses of migrants from all different tribes, from Afghan farmers to Syrian traders, if in the system once it doesn't really work anymore and they don't get what they wanted, there's a huge potential for chaos and violence. And this, at the same point, while they're not able to have a political alternative, will lead to an explosion of right-wing parties. And I think that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of a crisis, which then will lead to chaos and ethnic shocks, formative events that we cannot even imagine. Just, it's an experiment of thought. Imagine Berlin, Vienna, a blackout for 3 days, or Paris. What would happen at a blackout for 3 days in Paris or Vienna, and what would be the aftermath, and what would be the effect of the public debate? And the Hamas demonstration were an ethnic shock that shifted the overtone wind in the debate completely. And they noticed, and they're very afraid that the only force who has an alternative to the ideology, identity politics, and migration politics then could have a political victory. And I'm more optimistic than Martin, because I don't believe in a crash. I don't believe in a Mad Max scenario, but I know for sure, if you look at deglobalization, the demography, the baby bust to the baby boom, that will have 7 scarce years, more than 7 scarce years coming.
Well, perhaps this is a good point. I certainly don't want to cut any of you off if you had something you wanted to add to that, but perhaps this is a good point if we can, or you can lay out for us, on the one hand, what is the current situation in Germany and Austria, and how bad is it actually? We heard that everyone was going to freeze to death last winter because of not having stockpiled enough gas, but apparently that did not eventuate as many had imagined it would. So what is the situation? How bad is it? And what or who, what factions, which people are now coalescing as a reaction to this, and what are their prospects? And whoever would like to start on that.
Well, so I'll also say we didn't have a crisis last winter only because it was warm and gas consumption wasn't that much demanded. So we were lucky. Presently things are not very optimistic. Things are pretty bad, and there is of course a growing opposition, a growing political opposition, which includes a lot of different people, market liberals, traditional religious people, of course people on the right like us, and some other strains as well. The political establishment is very powerful. They're very well entrenched. They have a lot of repressive mechanisms at their disposal that they'll use against us, and I don't think we are as close to defeating them as many people imagine we are. I don't know much about the future. I think if AfD can be promoted to certain points in elections, we can definitely force political crises with the mainstream parties, the union parties, that will, I don't know, maybe not improve things for us, but at least move us to the next stage on the board, But I think there aren't any solutions in the present system. I think we just have to be clear about that. There's no way to vote our way out of this. There isn't going to be a simple way to fix this, and we have to advance to the next stage of repression, demasking of the regime. We have to make it more brittle, more overtly authoritarian. We have to hurt our prospects in the meantime, and then see where we are and try to do the next move.
I just want to add there that, of course, none of this amounts to an endorsement of these things happening. It's something that we're going to witness in order to, at which point one would hope that opportunities for civil, lawful, and constructive action.
Of course. I'm not. Of course, I'm not calling for anything like violent revolution or anything like that. But there has to be some kind of solution here.
I just want.
So I just want to stress, because I also don't want to make it seem like I'm yearning and I'm joyful, clean of all this crisis and catastrophes coming, but they are largely created by the system. So I think the system and its ideology will become a victim of the crisis that they create themselves. If they obviously would stop, and if our ideas and our solutions would become politics, we could avoid many of those crises. and they wouldn't be necessary, but they will be necessary in a way, because if they keep going like that in many ways, migration policy, climate policy, this crisis will happen. Just like the communist bloc in the end fell victim to its own flawed economic politics. But I agree. I think it's a very dark time, but I'm a bit more optimistic because I just see how nervous they are, how they're panicking, and also I think we're just living in a sweet spot for a real change of migration policy, at least, because for me that's the most important issue of all issues in Europe. And I think we're gonna see a lot of changes, and at least we're gonna see a real decision and really and something happening in the next 10 to 15 years. Maybe, to be honest, or we can vote ourselves out, but only if this electoral victory is accompanied by a metapolitical victory and a real metapolitical strategy. But then I even think that a reform could be possible. I call it the urbanization, and I think that there is a chance for that, at least in the next 15, 20 years.
And but before hearing more specifically about Austria, I just wanted to ask you, Eugipius, if I may, what is the situation for just a normal German right now? When you say that things are bad, what does that translate to? How can we outside the country form a picture of how all of this is affecting just your average person in Germany?
Right. So your average German, he pays half of his wages in tax, and he maybe makes 4,000 or 5,000 euros a month, and he is going to retire in 5 years, and he's going to receive 1,500 euros a month in pension. He's facing inflated prices on every front. He's facing the fact that he must replace his home heating system because of the new laws about heat pumps, the costs of maybe after subventions and so forth. I've had to do this myself, actually. Maybe you still have to pay 15,000 euros. It's so economically alone, I find it just extremely grim and sad. In addition to that, near me, right where I live in my little village in Oberbayern, they've set up a whole home for migrants. It just came out of nowhere. They just set it up in like an old gymnasium from a school, And so there's half the people in my neighborhood are from last year to this year are now suddenly Pakistanis or something, and they are smoking, and you don't feel safe outside anymore. So all this has happened inside of 18 months. It's very radicalizing. You feel very violated. It's not great at all, and I just don't see. I don't know. I'm very pessimistic about the future right now. It's I don't know what else to say.
So it's bad. Well, then, sorry to have jumped in there, Martin. Feel free to let us know what you think of all this and what's going on more specifically in Austria.
I'll let Martin start.
I haven't said anything in a while. We were being a bit vague here. It's good that we talk about more specific things, what that are not good. I mean, just the thing Eugipius mentioned about the taxes, people not being able to make a living anymore. Also, the question, what are these taxes being spent on, is also a big question. So the government bleeds you dry and they spend the money on all kinds of things that don't benefit you, that may even harm you. I mean, certainly during the COVID times, there was a lot of, it created larger groups of people that were mistrusting the state, the system, and are unhappy with things, how they go. And at that time, I mean, they were using our taxes to pay vaccinations and then forcing us taking them, threatening people that they would lose their jobs. I mean, this is certainly an attitude which shows a lot how the state perceives the people. And other things that come to my mind. I mean, I personally have a sort of cultural dysphoria, which is also a thing. When you look in public space, you see the things are being advertised. You see the relentless propaganda. You see what's happening in the cultural sector. This is all very, very sad and tired, and sometimes it's just certain minor things that really bother me a lot, because they are symptoms of the larger picture, of the larger cancer. One thing that comes to my mind is several architectural or art scenes in public space. Like they built this Martin may know it, this fountain. They built this fountain to celebrate the water supply anniversary of Vienna, and it was adorned with these absolutely horrible, ugly, distorted figures, which were made obviously by a very bad artist. And I take these things very serious, because they do reflect an image they have of themselves and of the people, and these images are certainly not healthy, and they're very stupid. Also, the sheer stupidity of it is sometimes absolutely breathtaking. There's a sort of infantilization in the minds of the people. Often we ask ourselves, so what politicians are doing, why are they doing it? Are they being malicious? Are they taking some New World Order orders? Or are they just being plain stupid? And I guess all three factors play a part here. But stupidity is something that is really enormous, and it has also, I think, to do if you're blinded by a bad, stupid, decadent ideology. I find this very bothersome. And you can see this kind of thing in all kinds of areas. I mean, recently we had in Vienna several really severe cases of violence against women, let's call it that. So, like rapes of teenage girls, even murders. There was an insane story happening when some Afghan assailant, he went into some brothel and he stabbed 3 Asian prostitutes. Of things like those. And then you get the discussion in public space. They have this idea of femicide. They say, "Oh, it's femicide," and I see this signaling in Vienna all the time. This political signaling. They have to do something, protect women against violence against women, and on the posters you always see some I don't know, boomers using knockout drops, to date rape somebody. And this is, of course, beyond of the reality. So when they have this term femicide, which is not a law term of law, I missed the word now. It's an ideological term. It's sort of a cover up for migrant violence, and the migrant violence has become really savage, absolutely savage, also in
Yes.
Germany. And this is a thing that, of course, is felt by many people in society, that this violence is first savage, and the second thing, that it's being covered up with these lies. And this is something I really suffer a lot about, to live with these lies, this signaling of lies all the time, in public space, in the newspapers, in the media, and all that. So this is something that is pretty bad.
Also, it's just so fucking stupid. The propaganda, the public discussion about all of these things is so retarded. It's almost unbearable. I thought I'd lose my mind during the whole Corona thing about how dumb all the COVID stuff was, and it is exactly the same. The has achieved levels of stupidity that are so open and obvious, and you're just expected to imbibe it. I just find it unbearable. The level of stupidity, the femicide, that retarded shit, and all of the apologetics around migrant violence. These crimes are really disturbing, and I don't really have a coherent point except to say that it's just an outrage, and the public discussion around it, the political apologetics about why it's okay somehow, are just it's unacceptably retarded. It's just so dumb.
Yes, one thing I must add for our German friends, German language speaking friends, for whom English is not their first language. They're not aware, of course, that speaking to my YouTube masters, they're not aware that the R word is objectionable. And so nothing that they are saying here.
I'm sorry about that.
It's nothing
ridiculous.
Here,
I'm sorry.
Yes, nothing about it is to be taken as ableist in any way, because we, of course, are not ableists, and we fully support differently abled people in our societies. Indeed, we must be very, very careful about speaking about anything having to do with vaccinations and all the rest. I want to encourage everyone to assiduously stay up to date with the latest health recommendations offered by your state and global authorities. And none of us here would expect you to fall prey to medical misinformation of any kind. But sorry for that parentheses, guys. Please continue.
Thank you very much. I think it's very important, and we're all boosted.
No, I'm vaccinated every day. I get vaccinated every day. I had one this morning over coffee. It was very nice.
You know,
I'm wearing a mask at the moment. Right now, you can't see me, fortunately.
I just want to let everyone know that
indoors.
This is considered humor among German language speaking people. But of course,
you can now even have a subscription.
Humor.
Yeah, it's a subscription. You know, like Netflix. You can do with AstraZeneca. They just deliver over the newest vaccination every month. But I want to go.
I really would prefer not to discuss the medical issues at all.
Okay,
already received a channel strike for it.
Maybe let's go into precise things. Okay, what's happening now in Germany and Austria, especially for Americans? You know what's on the table. So we have a lot of election. It's a super election year in 2024 in Germany. There'll be a European election, also obviously in Austria in June, and then in Germany you have 3 very important regional elections, and that's why they're so nervous. On the national level, the AfD is far, far away from power. But in Saxony, Thuringia, and Brandenburg, 3 regions in the east, they have regional election this year. And in all of this region, the AfD is leading. Thuringia, 31%. In then Saxony, 32.2%. And in Brandenburg, 29.8%. And they might make, if they have a big success, those regions ungovernable, and that's what they're really afraid of. And in Austria, to the European election, we also have the national election and 2 important regional elections in Styria and in Vorarlberg. So they're not so important, but they're also there. So we have a lot of elections. That's why everything's so heated up. And in Austria, the Freedom Party is about 28 to 30%, leading the polls. Might be the strongest party in the European election. Should be the strongest party in national election, and that's the situation at the moment. So on the national level, the AfD will not has no path to power at the moment. But on those 3 regional elections, it might become so big that they will not be able to form a functioning government there anymore, the old parties. And in Austria, the Freedom Party could do another coalition with the conservative party ÖVP, but this is very unlikely at the moment.
Not again.
I hope so, but they will and could also become so big that for the first time in Austrian history, they would need a 3-party coalition, which would make the new government totally fragile. So just a little update for everyone. That's the political situation now in Austria and Germany.
I would add something. Sorry. Can I add something here?
Yes, of course, please.
Maybe, I don't know how informed your listeners are, but here's one curious thing that I think has to be pointed out, that both in Germany and in Austria, there is just one opposition party. I mean, you can vote. There are also certainly some very, very small, tiny parties which are somewhat opposition. But in Germany, you have AfD, and in Austria have a Freedom Party, and our Freedom Party has a much stronger position than AfD in Germany because it has been established for decades. And even though they are always, the bogeyman for the media, they are sort of part of the game. They cannot be, they cannot get away from them. They have to be in a way respected, even by the media. So the position is much stronger, and AfD is a much younger party, just about 10 years old. And the media and politics in Germany, they are trying to prevent them from getting such a foothold as the Freedom Party has. Now, here's the thing that is maybe a bit disappointing. Freedom Party has been in the government several times, and within my lifetime, I can remember we had 2 times coalitions with the Conservative Party or the center right party, which is ruling Austria like a mafia, and both times it was rather disappointing. This is something that is always on my mind when people talk about election victories, and so we have now leading the Freedom Party a very competent man whom I respect a lot. This is Herbert Kickl. He's really far above average of the usual Freedom Party functionary, and certainly he's much more competent than his predecessor Strache. He was kicked out with a scandal, a media scandal from the last government. People hope that he might get chancellor someday. Sometimes I'm afraid of it, for the simple reason that I'm afraid it would be disappointing. There are lots of hopes in election victories. I don't see them justified in any way from experience, what I can see. And I can see that Kickl is really best when he's in opposition. Then he's really damn good. The opposition is important. But once the lead is being taken, I guess all the powers that be will work on sabotaging it and will try to drag it down. And you see it also in other countries. I mean, you saw it with Trump happening. I mean, Trump was also in many ways not competent, but there was not much he could do because he also had to drag the the swamp with him. And the same would happen if you would have I don't know, Le Pen victories in France or so. So I'm not saying elections are not important. I think the important thing I see about the parties is that they do create some counter structure where people can shelter around. Um, and this is I see it happening with AfD, with a lot of networking. There's some kind of parallel Germany in the making. Also in Austria, a sort of parallel Austria where you have at least some shelter with the political party. But in the long run, I don't see parties or party victories changing much. This is what I would add here.
So I totally agree. I think that it's easy to overstate what can happen if AfD win this or that election. One of my big hopes is that AfD get into government in the East, and especially Saxony. I think there's a possibility. Maybe it's not great, maybe it's only 15-20% chance. And then we have a space. Maybe they take the domestic intelligence at the level of the Landeslevel, at the level of the state, and they turn it off. So we can have an area in Germany where we're not constantly persecuted and where tweets aren't always being reported to the EU and everything, and have a little bit of space in Germany where intelligence services are not bothering us and where we can form our own systems a little bit. So I have minor hopes like that. I agree that one of the reasons that AfD are so compelling as a party is that they have been excluded from power by the cordon sanitaire, by the Brandmauer, and this has lent them a kind of purity, an ideological purity. They haven't been forced to form coalitions. They haven't been forced to take responsibility for compromises and so forth. And it's made them a more compelling, more ideologically pure party. And that would be a problem if they enter government, obviously. but there are also smaller gains I hope for in this way. And yes.
Yeah, one small gain, one white pill happened yesterday in Dresden.
Yes.
Maybe you wanna expand on it, because I mean.
No, you tell story. It's your story. Tell it.
I haven't heard the Dresden story yet, so it's news to
I mean,
me.
it's minor thing. I don't think it will make Martin like nothing.
No, it's not a big deal, but it's funny. Yeah.
Are we
Okay,
talking
but
about the same thing, or so?
We're talking about the Bezahlkarten, oder?
Exactly. Yeah, the Bezahlkarten. So the Bezahlkarten is a big thing. I call them remigration cards, because actually it's a little bit of our proposition for remigration. Very funny. So in some regions of Germany, the asylum seekers, the refugees, did not get money, cash money, but they did get little plastic cards with which they could buy like food stuff in the supermarket, and they couldn't use it to send money home or for legal stuff, and also I think it was restricted for alcohol. And immediately hordes of those migrants left this region and fled. So they were fleeing again, but this time from the Bezahlkarten, the payment cards. And then there was a big debate about introducing these payment cards. And now in Dresden, the city council of Dresden has voted for these payment cards in Dresden. Asylum seekers will not get any cash money in Dresden anymore. And the sensation about this is the request for that, or I don't know how you call it. I don't have the political lingo at hand. So the Agypius have to help me out. How you call it? Like a
the proposition or something. I don't know how.
Proposition. Thank you very much. Yeah. So the proposition, it came from the AfD and the CDU and the FDP and the Freie Wähler, which is a party. So they all kind of made a political coalition already, and so they work together for that. So the Cordon Sanitaire, in this sense, is broken already in Dresden at this very first decision. And I think that's very interesting, and I think it will increase this trend.
The federal CDU is already promising consequences for Saxon CDU
Really?
representatives. Yeah. They're all angry about it, but that was inevitable, But they are. It's a very funny, amusing story. It happened a day after I'm speaking from Dresden. I came here with family for Easter, and I always thought it was a very fun welcome to the city that this whole thing happened right when I came. It's amusing to me.
And just a quick question, or maybe not so quick. I'd like to form a picture of who the AfD are in terms of a counter elite. The whole elite theory idea is that, organized minorities, as all of you gentlemen certainly know, are in the best position to form a block of resistance or an alternative, as it were. And one of the big question marks for me, obviously, Germany has long and historically, due to its canals and rivers in the early days before railroad and the rest, it was, of course, very much an industrial nation, and much of its post-war economic growth, insofar as I understand it, relies on industry, heavy industry in particular. And it is heavy industry, it's deindustrialization that we're always hearing about. And I have to imagine to myself that you would have to have any number of large economic concerns, companies, but of course also the families behind them, that are very wealthy people who are the ones that stand to lose the most from what is being done. And so I wonder what the core is of the reaction in both Germany and in Austria. I don't know that all of these aspects necessarily apply to Austria. Just because I'm too ignorant about both countries. But where does the reaction come from? And in particular, what is going on with all the industrialists that there would have to be there who are presumably being disenfranchised?
Very good question. Because if you look at it, like the core of German conservatism was always the German Schwermetall, the metal industry. You know, they always funded nationalist right-wing movement, and this obviously was destroyed and, in a way, dissolved after the Second World War. You still have the German middle-sized enterprises, and they're dying away. 2023, there were 33,000 enterprises that just vanished. But I don't know if the bigger ones are still as autonomous to really become a driving finance factor for political change in Germany. Maybe you're very right. I think it's very important to see what's happening here, and we see people like Elon Musk. And if you look at it, for example, in Germany right now, one of the biggest media outlets that is criticizing the current politics, they're a bit neocon-ish. I would compare them to Fox News. They are called News. NIUS, and they're funded by a German, I think, billionaire or millionaire, who obviously a bit like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel is anti-woke. So I think this will become more and more important. I don't really know if this deindustrialization policy at some point will create an economic group that could become part of a new historic bloc and could fund the opposition. But if you look at the farmer protests, and if you look at a lot of people from the middle class, small enterprises who were part of the anti-COVID protests, I think there's also kind of a conservative county, you know, emerging in Germany. Also, the Potsdam meeting, for example, there were people there who are very wealthy entrepreneurs, and they're getting more and more of those people, and that's why also the German state is cracking down so hard on them. At the moment, the biggest focus is on donors. So they really have a huge campaign against anybody who dares to donate to the AfD or right-wing movement. The Minister of Interior said it verbatim that everybody who donates to right-wing movement doesn't have to fall under the illusion that this will stay secret and we will turn every stone and we'll make any donor public. So that's at the moment really their fear. So I think it's very interesting. You really struck a nerve there. It would be very interesting to see what's happening. But at the moment, we see a huge flow of human resources, of intelligence, of money, of also investment, foreign investment to the United States.
Lichtmet, do you have any thoughts on this?
Wait a second. What comes to my mind now is Martin, the plan of Faeser. She's the Minister for the Interior in Germany, and she has a left-wing Antifa background, and she recently presented this program how to fight against extremism at the far right. And it's quite insane what they are trying to do here. But certainly one of the key things is they want to cut off any financial supply that could go into institutions and organizations and publishing houses, you know, which concerns me. So my own publisher, Antaios, which is the major publishing house for right-wing intellectual books. So they try to cut the financial stream, and also, of course, anything else that people would not be able to book some location, you know, for a conference or speeches or anything like that. And they want to. I mean, some of these measures have been in practice for a while now, but they want to make them more effective. And they want to change the law in a direction that becomes more and more easy, that when you have just a suspicion that this could be some so-called far-right thing, you can get into action. So there are really plans there to ruin people, to ruin their reputation, to ruin them financially, to block their freedom of movement, to cut down their civil rights to some extent. This is certainly a thing which is becoming more and more dangerous. And
Before asking, oh, sorry.
Hmm.
Go on.
Oh,
Sorry.
well, I mean, I just thought I can only about AfD. I can only talk on a microscopic level. I'm not so familiar with the party politics and the party inside things going on. I find them kind of tedious. I mean, it's not so different from any other party. But what I can see, for example, recently last weekend, I was invited to Germany. To Düsseldorf to speak at some AfD faction wasn't a big audience. It was about let's say 30 people or so, and I found it the people who came. I talked with several of them, and they were very bright people, very interesting people. Of course, you will always often find some also strange or eccentric people, which is usual in the outlaw groups and so. But overall, I had a very positive impression, and several people also told me that they joined the party primarily because it gives them a social circle where they can feel free. Where they know they are not being cancelled, where they know they find people who are like-minded, where they can meet friends or anything else, make connections, and so this is something on the smaller scale I find important. This is what I say when I see the party helps up building some alternative structure or even some alternative infrastructure. And I think this is by now also the only way to go, because we are far from, let's say, saving the whole thing, which I don't think is really possible anymore. But parts of it can be sort of not liberated, but it may be much more better to live there if you have these structures happening and arising. And certainly you also need rich people or industrialists or people who are also concerned, who join, because money is definitely very, very important. Absolutely. And they know that cutting off the money means killing the party, killing the alternative media, killing the alternative structures. This is certainly needed. And on the other hand, the party also serves a bit as a way to get people jobs. I find this from my time in the right-wing scene in Germany. Many people I used to know, like 15 years back or so, who were in the media and alternative media and such. They now have found jobs at the AfD at one point or another. And this is also important because people need jobs, people need money, and this is also what the party is good for. You see.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
one point I would add to that is that there's currently plotting underway in the higher reaches of the political establishment in Germany to deny the AfD government funding. So all parties in Germany receive substantial subsidies from the government to operate as political parties, to run their campaigns and pay interns to make photocopies and so forth. And there's this is one of the various means currently underway to attack AfD and cripple them politically. And so this one, I think, is most likely to succeed, is that the AfD are denied their government subsidies in the near future. And this one of the most crucial questions for AfD going forward is how they survive this attack, if they're able to survive on private donations and or not, and what that looks like. But I think that is even a more immediate threat to them than banning the party, which is the thing everyone wants to talk about, but I think is less likely. But that they are basically excluded from government funding is a more likely scenario, in which case a lot of these funds dry up and they become less of a locus for the right in Germany.
It would
And
be
I
also
just-
a more elegant way, because then you can keep the democracy simulation, running, and then the
Yes.
AfD just withers away because they cannot pay high potential anymore, and everything gets more like unprofessional. At the same time, we also mustn't underestimate that they're flooding the AfD now with agent provocateur and
Yeah, exactly. Of course, yes, exactly.
Yeah, and that's something. I mean, it came out like in just one regional AFD that hundreds confirmed feds, and if you
exactly, it's unbelievable. Exactly.
if you extrapolate this, the AFD at least has like I think 1,500, 2,000 federal agents already within the party structures. And then there was an article recently about Telegram agents, and they have an own house, the Secret Service, where they have a huge like a wardrobe of where they have the clothes, and
Yes.
wigs, and they make photo shoots to have different personalities of real life photos, and they're infiltrating Telegram groups, and those people are allowed to commit propaganda crimes. So they're allowed to
Exactly. They're allowed to provoke you into saying things that are illegal and so forth.
Exactly. So in a group, and all of these people in the group are using racial slurs, denying stuff, and inciting hatred. And you think, oh well, that's normal, and you also do it, and then you go to prison, and all those people were federal agents. That's happening now. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit. That's happening in Germany.
Well, it's already happened. I mean, what do you think was with the Reichsbürger, with the whole thing about with Prince and everything? How was that done? They had tons of agents already to provoke those kinds of things. This happens all the time.
Absolutely.
They have a license to hate speech, so to speak.
Yes.
Agents with a license for hate speech. I mean, it must be hilarious to if we had some undercover agent, a double agent, which we could sneak into one of those houses where they have the costumes, and they have probably a library with all of our books, and they have and everybody like in an office is sitting behind a computer and hate speeching all the time, and provocation, and then it would be hilarious to have an inside report of all that. I mean, and this also certainly is part. Yeah, it would be a great stage play or a movie. It would be a movie script, a very interesting one, a satirical movie script based on this kind of. Maybe we should do an independent film with crowdfunding where we sort of satirize this. So, but this is part of this is part of the other strategy that they also discussing of whether you can ban the AFD, whether you can make it illegal. This is rather hard to do. They tried it back then with the NPD, which was this small far-right, old right party. It was also infested with feds like crazy, and they didn't succeed. But I'm not sure. I mean, they have now a different name. This party, Riders is now Twix.
Heimat,
Heimat, Heimat Party. I'm not sure if they get. Are they getting the party money cancelled now? I think this is what
I believe that's already happened. Yes, that's
the
precedent for cancelling the money for AfD.
They're getting it cancelled, but at the moment they're not entitled to any money because they're too small. So it's not an effective thing, but it's a blueprint.
Yes,
definitely.
The whole thought about this process about cancelling Heimat funding was all sort of a foreplay for cancelling AfD funding. It was just a prologue.
Right, like what they call a dry run.
AfD's. I mean, AfD is now too big to do that. I mean, it's really, really bad optics if you fight a party that in some parts of Germany has 20 to 30% of the votes. AfD never had that. Too big to ban. So.
But perhaps not too big to defund. I think this is really what they're going to do. They're going to try to do this first, and I think they likely succeed. Yeah.
If you're the police and in your city there's a drug trade going on, you don't shut it completely down because you want to keep it under control because there are
exactly right. Yeah.
I call it the reek strategy. You maybe watched Game of Thrones. One of the most disturbing things was when this guy, I think Theon Greyjoy, was castrated and became this broken pet, of this villain. I stopped watching this the show after that because I didn't like. It was too drastic for me. And I think they want to castrate the AfD metapolitically. They want to wear it down, but they want to keep it alive and bleed it out slowly, keep it under control, even use it maybe for the political goals, and then have all the potential of dissidents being within this big, dying, chaotic, crazy piece of political flesh. That's their game plan, in my opinion.
Yes, I think that's right. I think also it's important to remember AfD has different strains, right? So of course, they're originally a libertarian market liberal party that was Eurosceptic after 2008. And then they became more nationalist. They included more nationalist energy. In recent years, there's also some traditionalists, the Werteunion around Hans-Georg Maaßen wants to make that his own party and draw some of those energies away. But the AfD right now is not actually so bad for establishment purposes because it tempers a lot of right-wing nationalist ideas with libertarian stuff and other things. If they ban the party, that's probably not too great for them because then there's going to be new parties that maybe channel these nationalist energies in purer, more refined ways. So they don't want to kill the AfD exactly. They want to keep it around in attenuated form. I think that is probably what they're aiming for.
And
I agree.
Maybe we should. Maybe we should mention a bit the split in the party. I hear often talking about. I'm not an expert on this. Maybe Martin has a better founded opinion on it, but it is often said that there's a difference between the party in the east and in the west. So in the east, they tend to be more nationalist. They have this thing which we call the solidaric patriotism. And the market liberals or the pro-Atlanticists, all these kind of people are more in the West, and there are often tensions within the party between those. And they used to be quite risky for the unity of the party for a while. So far, it didn't succeed, and also the guys who were more liberal Atlanticists, they tend to lose. They are not that attractive or that interesting. The people that really get the votes are the people in the East who actually have an alternative to the present policies. So, Martin, do you think how severe is this split within the party?
It's definitely there, and unfortunately, it was never really resolved because you had this 3 attempts to turn the AfD into a more liberal and more conservative party by the heads who all came from the West, but in a way, there were these attempts were prevented by the base of the AfD and also by important figures from the East who are more right wing. But if you look at the German demography, the German East, these countries I mentioned before, together have about 12 million inhabitants. And if you know the amount of people living in Germany, you know that's not much. There's a little bit more than Austria and Switzerland. So actually, they together a very small country, and also economically they're not so important. So obviously, the Western AfDs, although they're not so strong relatively, they have way more members, way more money, and on the long term, they're also stronger within the party, but they have a very different political scenario because they have to deal, if you go to the beginning of a conversation, with a more brainwashed, more re-educated populace and electorate. And so they say, okay, we need a different strategy and approach here. And the Eastern AfD with their approach, which is fitting for the Eastern mindset, they destroy our chances here. I'm trying to play Advocatus Diaboli here. And that's a conflict that at the long term is really, I don't know if it's really resolvable because it is a systemic problem, not a personal and not even an ideological issue, because you have a country which is still very, very split ideologically, economically. And it might be hard to have a party, that has 2 different strategies and 2 different rhetorics, but at the same time running as a one party. Maybe in the future, I'm just speculating here, a system like the CDU-CSU could be interesting for the AfD because the Conservatives in Germany, the CDU in Bavaria are called CSU, are a bit more right-wing and are a distinct party that only runs for election in Bavaria and works together on the national level. So that's just my take on that. But there definitely, unfortunately, are fractures that can be used by the enemy. I personally think that the only common denominator and sense and the point commun could be remigration, migration policy, de-Islamization, and all the other things, geopolitics, economic politics, and so on, should be avoided because it would create a never-ending civil war within the right. But obviously, that's also just my opinion, and there are many, many camps and lands and brands in the AfD.
Well, there's another issue which is one of your favorites, Martin. There are several people in AfD who are advocating to appeal also to certain migrant groups to vote for them. Like they say, many of the Turkish people in Germany, they don't like woke stuff, and they think it's a good idea to reach out to them as well. So, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's very, very wrong, the ethnic vote, and as a right-wing party who's against non-European mass migration, you cannot create a working alliance with non-European parallel societies within your own country. It just doesn't work at all. And it will not work, and it only would work if you completely destroy the party line and alienate your indigenous voters and even assimilated migrants who are voting your party, to prevent the Islamization, to dissolve the parallel societies and not pander to them. So I think that would be very wrong. It has been tried by Alain Soral, Égalité et Réconciliation in France, and other movements. And it's just a typical German disease, of German intellectuals who think 3 steps ahead and are super smoked up in their ideas. And we had this a few years ago. It was this fate of, like, we have to make a coalition, a Querfront with communists, and then we'll be strong enough. And now it's this new brand. We have to make a coalition with conservative Muslims. Fortunately, it's not really that strong. But there are few people who really believe it and promote it in the AfD, but I think it has no future because it's completely counterintuitive to the core voters of the AfD. But then on the other hand, obviously, you have what Raffaella Doncic calls symbolic inclusion in a very important book, Dilemmas of Inclusion. It's about the ethnic vote and the Muslim vote in Europe. This is more, I think, prevalent in the West, where the people say, okay, we need to find the most minority AfD member, maybe like a black guy in a wheelchair, who's also gay, and then we can put him on all the posters and show the people that we're actually super kind and
inclusive.
At the Smarties dogma, as you call it. And that's something that's already happening in a way, because there's a trial going on right now where the AfD tries to prove that they're not extremists, and as a living proof, to show that they're not nationalists and ethnic nationalists, they showed members with migration background. And this kind of symbolic inclusion, I think, will become very prevalent in the West. I also think it's not good because it takes away authenticity from a party, and in the long term will scare off the young idealistic activists in the youth, and it will help other more radical right-wing flank parties. And I think it's not a good decision. So I think that's a very bad. The AfD is handling the question of the ethnic vote in a very, very bad way, because they've never done any research on it. They've never read anything about it, although we are writing about it for years, and now they're just like sleepwalking into this important issue.
I certainly think. Sorry.
Well, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I certainly do think. Well, I agree with what Martin says. I certainly think, of course, they should leave doors open to certain migrants who are willing to participate. And I see this on a local basis. So even when I make speeches at small AfD groups, there's always some black guy or some Muslim guy there. So there are a few of them always there, and they should be included, certainly. I think so. But to advertise this kind of thing on the posters and so, I think is also wrong, because the focus should be, it's about us. This is important, and this is the one distinction. Yeah, this is the one distinction that sets us apart from the other parties. And maybe
it's just also kind of a boomer aesthetic when you start including all kinds of brown people and people who can't see and disabled people and so forth in your ads. It's I don't know, it's pandering, it's embarrassing, it seems desperate. it's not a good look.
And
It's
the
also
important
not
thing is,
working. It's not
Yeah.
working also. I mean,
Well, of course, it doesn't work. Never works. If you're desperate, nothing works. You
no,
know.
it works, but it works very differently. And that's why I mentioned those books. This has already been researched. It works, but the target audience for this symbolic inclusion are not migrants themselves, but the liberal elites of the indigenous population, because you show them how open-minded you are. So if they
right,
does
yeah.
this,
Mm.
the target audience
Yeah,
are not
well, you
really
just
migrants.
cock yourself in that way you
Yes.
work. I mean, you just become more leftist and more inclusive.
The
Well,
target
that's
audience would be the urban green voters, and they will never vote for the AfD at the moment. So I've also seen it, migrants who are really assimilated, and want the German people to live, and there are many of them, very interesting, and who are even more hardcore for remigration than Martin and me. I want to remember you all of Akif Pirinci, a Turkish guy who was one of the, I would say,
yes.
icebreakers, for remigration. He now has to go to prison for criticizing migration so strongly in Germany. And he wrote
I
a
would
book
say not
about
even strongly. He said things that were just less strong than I've said on my own blog. It was bizarre that he was prosecuted
please
for
watch
that.
out, Occupus, don't, like
Yeah, he was sent to he was condemned to jail now.
yes.
So this Turkish writer, and this is insane, just for some things he said, and it was completely twisted by the prosecution. So he
That was
paid really
literally
a price.
deliberately misunderstood. I mean, what he
Yeah,
said was,
yeah.
it was absurd. Yeah.
I think people like Akif Pirinci should be a target audience for the AfD, but I know him and know people like him. He would vote for the AfD less likely if the AfD would make like adverts like Coca-Cola
Yes.
and United Colors of Benetton. So if you, I think
Yeah.
they mix it completely up, and in the end, it's this wise of politicians to be loved and to be not attacked by the media so much. And I know it a bit myself because I've been in many interview situations. And if they show you all this dangerous quote of Höcke and this thing, this little devil inside you tells you, if you distance yourself right now, everything will become nice. And they will be nice to you and will leave you at the pressure. Just now say, I wouldn't phrase it like that, and that's not my language, something like that, like distance yourself a little bit, and then this person will like you. And I know it's very hard, and most AfD people crumble under pressure. And going back to what Semyagog said about the stick and the carrot, I believe in the stick, and there needs to be a stick from right-wing media outside that really, really criticizes them in a very mean and bad way. Okay, not mean, in a very justified, harsh way, if they can.
Yes.
Otherwise, it doesn't work. And that's why alternative media is so important. And in Austria, there's a big alternative media scene, which is very, very brutal on Freedom Party politicians who cuck. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why the Freedom Party is so different right now.
I think it's just more attractive if you are culturally and ethnically self-confident and you don't pander to other groups. It's just undeniably so.
Absolutely. We've seen it in the United States where people who just accord themselves, just basic self-respect. No one wants to follow someone who slithers on their belly. I mean, and it's not as if, Turks or Poles or whomever living in Germany can't see that. When anyone who abases themselves in that way makes themselves a target of ridicule, not not a magnet for aspirations. I wanted to ask about one of these side parties, but very quickly, two questions. One came in the chat where someone was saying, "Why is there a picture of a Danish king?" It's on the slate for this when it's about Austria and Germany. That's because that's the only good image I could find of the basic idea of a king sleeping beneath a mountain, waiting for the day when his people need him. Need him to arise again, and that's an old German story. I mean, isn't it Frederick Barbarossa who's supposedly sleeping in the Kiffhauser or however you say it? So that's why that image was chosen. There was another question that I just wanted to ask because it was a good one. It's from the chat. How much? Before I move on to one of my own, how much autonomy do the individual states have in relation to the federal government in Germany?
Do you want to answer that, Gypius? I think you're the most knowledgeable person about this.
Well, I don't know. They have substantial autonomy in theory. So Germany has fairly strong federal traditions and federal legal system, but in practice, the states cooperate to enforce the same agenda across the entire country. So in a way, via cultural and social workarounds, we have less federalism than the United States, for example.
So basically, it exists there in potential, but the outcome of that would have to wait for one of these AfD victories in the region to be to really be tested to see what the limits of that are.
Exactly. So for example, if the AfD are to achieve a position in government in Saxony or Thüringen in the upcoming elections, there's a lot that could be gained by cutting back domestic intelligence service surveillance of local dissident groups and so forth. But right now, there's informal and more formal cooperation agreements that make German policy pretty much uniform across the country. And this was very much the case during COVID, where they all had their minister-president conferences to enforce the same policy everywhere, even though they have separate jurisdictions in the various states.
And how about Austria? Since we haven't been talking as much about them, and how does the central control versus the idea of people gaining limited victories in particular provinces or regions? How does that break out?
Very similar, even worse, I would say, because we're a republic, and the most important things, from financial issues to migration issues, are decided by the Austrian government. So that's I think there's even less room for that in Austria. I mean, maybe Martin differs, but that's how I see it.
Lichtmetz, your thoughts?
No, I don't differ. I mean, certainly, it becomes live politics become a bit different when you move from Vienna to Lower Austria, because I know both very well, and there's certainly a difference here. I also remember that Vienna was very proud to keep up the COVID measures while the rest of the country already had stopped. And in Vienna, they were still keeping things like mask mandates, and so these are things when you can see there's a difference between these Bundesländer. How would you call it in English, Martin? The
states. I don't know.
States.
Yeah, we have 9 of them. We have just 9 of them, and yeah, so
central control is pretty thorough.
Yes, it is. But I think if you look at Europe in the terms comparison to the United States, and compare the European Union to the Union of the United States, then there's a higher chance of national, I would say, difference. But maybe America also, maybe we're also going to see a secessionist movement in America. I think it's a very, very interesting time to be alive.
Oh, well, yes, it is indeed. One thing that I did not do at the outset, gentlemen, and I should have, was to ask you how much time you have. I have as much as you like, but I want to be sensitive to your own situations. How much longer can we run this?
well, for my part, I would not much longer than half an hour.
Okay.
And the other guys may want to stay longer, but
that would also be good for me, because I have to get up early tomorrow, unfortunately. So
no, as an old man, half hour sounds good to me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then
and it's midnight.
Well, there's two things at least I want to ask you about, and I'm sure there are probably things that I did not queue up, or present you the opportunity to mention. So maybe we can get through these two questions as quickly as possible, and then I'll give the floor to each of you so that you can cover whatever it is that you might have thought was important to bring up that you hadn't had a chance to do yet. But the first question I wanted to ask about is what do you make of Wagenknecht and her party, and as a sort of someone who could peel votes potentially away from people who might otherwise vote for the AfD, or is she someone with whom they could form a coalition? I mean, what are your thoughts on her? Anyone?
Well, I would say that the Wagenknecht Partei is not peeling votes from AfD at all, according to any polling data we've seen. She is rather a rebranding of the left party, and she is pulling votes from the SPD and from a little bit from the Union Party, perhaps. But it's not it's not what it was marketed to be. And my theory about the Bündnis der Wagenknecht is that it's really an attempt to save the current coalition, that it's really a sort of controlled opposition establishment ploy. And the great fear is that the FDP is not going to make it into the Bundestag in 2025 because they destroyed themselves in the Scholz government. Everyone hates them. Their core voters hate them. And what's going to happen is when 2025 happens, FDP maybe doesn't make it into the Bundestag, and so the Scholz coalition government needs to have another partner, and that the Bündnis der Wagenknecht is to be the new partner, and that's what this whole ruse is about. And so if you look at polling, it's not really relevant for AfD at all, and for me, it's not very interesting question as far as that goes. It's basically a slightly immigration skeptic party. They want peace in Ukraine. They're sort of a little bit more friendly towards Russia than current government, but not for me. It's just not a very interesting party otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Are you like a question for you right now? You really think that they don't take too much votes from the AfD? Because if you look at the polling, you definitely see a decline in the AfD when the Bündnis der Wagenknecht was polled as well. Obviously, it was also a small decline because of the whole Potsdam Gate. But then this decline really materialized and became, substantial and permanent when the BSW, how the party is called, was polled.
Yeah, so you look at the results historically, and they maybe pulled a single point from AfD before the whole Potsdam thing happened. I think there's a phenomenon of shy AfD voters who are being polled and asked, are you voting for AfD? And they flee in their answers to the most adjacent party or something. But it's really, it seems to me, a minor effect. I mean, I've looked at multiple poll results. It's not very much. I don't know. Also, it's very hard to judge the data right now because they have fielded no candidates. I think they're not going to field any candidates in the elections in the East. So they're kind of a phantom party, So I'm not very worried about them.
I agree with your analysis totally. Just this was the one question, because I'm not afraid of all of them, because they all, as you said, live of this aura of not being tested, of being new, and once they have to prove themselves, they either will work together with the AfD, and then it would really be an alternative for the AfD voters, or they join the Cordon Sanitaire, and then they will not be a threat for the AfD anymore. Same goes for the Werteunion.
Werteunion, yeah, exactly.
So
the BSW, they've made statements in both directions. So early they said they would not work with AfD, and then later Sarah Wagenknecht sort of moderated that and said maybe we will kind of work with them, at least in certain votes. And she left the question of coalitions open. So I don't really know what they're planning, but they're definitely very establishment friendly is the point to make about
But you know, I
Wagenknecht.
think there also might be a chance. Like if they really stay, I think they will not stay because it's a one-person party and it will break apart. And if you look at them,
Yeah.
Muhammad Amir Ali and this Di Fabio,
Yeah, eben, yeah,
right,
exactly. Yeah.
it's way too different, and everybody, you know, of all these political, you know, Wabonk guys who now
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
career. But if they really would become a strong party, and then, for example, maybe they would say together with the AfD, we could form a government in Thuringia. We will not do it, but we will choose a neutral person as the president. We'll make kind of an expert government, and we differ in these kinds of things. And there we'll do anything, but we will work together in kind of solidary, patriotic issue, and also to hold migration a bit. Then it could become a very interesting way for the AfD to get like actual political power and some ministries in a country. So I wouldn't even see them as negative, even if they were successful and authentic. But if they're successful and then they join the Cordon Sanitaire, there's no need for them anymore, and they will dissolve into the Green and the left-wing party.
Yeah, they'll face the same fate as Die Linke, right? If they join the Cordon Sanitaire and do everything everyone else does, then they're just a Neue Linke and nobody cares.
Completely agree.
Martinel, any thoughts on that?
I would even see overall. I used to like Sarah Wagenknecht. I see a somewhat metapolitical value about her. She was labeled as a right-wing populist as early as 2015 or 16, I think, because she was far more reasonable during the refugee crisis than most politicians were. And over the years, I also had a certain respect for her because she seemed more honest, more reasonable than most of the establishment politicians. And she also wrote the book about against the woke policies of the left. She felt like this was straying away from the core ideas of the left. They talk about identity politics and about queer politics and all that all the time. So this was a thing she would criticize, and I think that does have some value because these are opinions that overlap with positions within AfD, and I don't think it does. Some people feel, okay, this is now a sort of containment. People who are too scared to vote for AfD can say, okay, we still have Wagenknecht. But I think it gives these ideas a bit more of a license. And eventually everybody who agrees with Sarah on the important points will rather go to AfD than vote for some of these fake parties. So I think there's overall a meta-political value in Wagenknecht.
No, I totally agree. Yeah.
I also agree.
Well, then here's a quick question for you, or we have a little bit of time. I just want to be careful to leave you each time to share your thoughts at the end. But I have to ask, what the hell is going on with Ukraine? I mean, what does this represent in terms of how it could change the political landscape, particularly in Germany? But I'm also interested in it relative to Austria, mainly because Austria has been famously neutral for so long. And, again, I'm not particularly knowledgeable, so correct me if I'm wrong. But it seems that Austrian neutrality in the course of this debacle has been considerably eroded. So maybe we could start with Eugipius. What do you think? What are your thoughts on Ukraine and the ways in which it could affect the political landscape in Germany?
Well, so the biggest event recently with respect to Ukraine was the Taurus leaks. So German generals, in their carelessness, allowed themselves to be wiretapped while discussing practical questions of whether to allow Taurus cruise missiles to be given to Ukraine and the practicalities of using them to target the Kerch bridge. And this entire discussion around Taurus has become a very huge political point in Germany because the SPD and our Chancellor, Gerhard Scholz, are trying to reposition themselves as a kind of light anti-war party. It's, I don't know, about Ukraine more broadly, the Taurus leaks, I've listened to them, I wrote several posts about them. I think they suggest general disarray in Germany politically about Ukraine and about strategy in the East. And I don't know, I feel a little incoherent here. We are in a point of danger because Ukraine prospects are fading and European NATO boosters are becoming more desperate. I think in the near term, we are going to be safe because Europe is so disarmed and demilitarized. We don't have any options to escalate beyond what we already have. So we're probably not going to face any catastrophe, but a great danger is if in the near term, the war drags out and European powers continue to rearm and to indulge their aggressive fantasies. So maybe there's 5 or 10% chance of some kind of direct NATO involvement and escalation in Ukraine. Otherwise, I don't know. I think the entire Ukraine thing will play out and not be important in the near future.
Very good. Our Austrians, what are your thoughts?
Martin, you want to go first? Okay. Well,
Perhaps he's away from the mic. Yeah.
no issue. Then I'll go first. I think it's I don't know. I think it's a very problematic situation because apparently after Russia has now stabilized and it's now an offensive, and I think all experts agree that Russia will make considerable gains in the summer, and nobody yet knows if Ukraine can again find the way back into the battle and get some initiative. The answer to that from the West and Western Europe was aggression, sending troops, escalation of words, and then also the perspective of a Trump presidency and all the warnings of Trump withdrawing NATO support, not supporting countries if they don't pay the protection money. The answer again was verbal escalation. So it seems in a way that the West or like European heads of state have decided that this loss of faith is unbearable for them, and they will start an arms race and they will try to send troops to Ukraine. The response by Russia obviously has been the same. Now you have this terrorist attack where it's quite unclear what really happened, but it's also not helpful to ease the tensions. I have to say I really don't know what's going to happen there, and I'm quite concerned about the situation there. I think it might escalate. I don't know why, I don't know how and when, but it really might escalate. And in terms of playing international politics, in Austria, this war is very unpopular. Everything that drags Austria into this war is even more unpopular. Neutrality is hugely popular among the Austrians. It's part of the Austrian identity. And although the elite of all the parties, except for the Freedom Party, want to make Austria part of NATO and part of Sky Shield, the Austrian population doesn't like it at all. So that's next to migration, COVID, the war on neutrality is a big bonus for the Freedom Party because the only party has a coherent dissident opinion on that. But obviously, if we shut down all gas and oil supply from Russia, or if the conflict really escalates, it will also definitely hit Austria. And I think everything can happen there. To be honest, I think the situation is not under control at all.
Very good. Martin, you're back.
Yeah, not much to add here. Certainly, the neutrality is one of the core identity issues of the Austrian state. It was sort of in 1955 when the occupation powers left, both the Soviets and the Americans, they was under the condition of the agreement that Austria would remain a neutral country. And every school child learns this, how important that is. So it comes of it seems kind of puzzling and alienating to many people that the Austrian political elites would just flush this down the toilet with their rhetorics and disrespect this thing which we have been taught for generations is so very important. And I think it's true. I don't think support for Ukraine is very popular in Austria. And similar to the AfD in Germany, the reason why the stance is rather, let's say, I mean, parts in AfD or Freedom Party tend to be more pro-Russian, but the thing is, you're already deemed pro-Russian if you are not very enthusiastic to support NATO policies and this whole thing. I mean, the warmongering is also quite scary to many people. There are certain groups for whom it is an important thing to cheer for Ukraine, but in a general public, it's not a very popular thing. I mean, this could bring us maybe to talk a bit about geopolitics of AfD and Freedom Party. This is also a discussion within the party, certainly, especially within AfD, because whenever you talk about the question of German sovereignty, you have to ask who's in charge. How can we reach it? And certainly, Germany is under the shadow of the American empire. We started from there in this discussion. So Germany is so cocked they can't even protest against having Nord Stream destroyed. And so the question is that some say that in the present situation, sovereignty for Germany, national sovereignty, is far away. So some tend to look more to the east and think, maybe Russia or China could be better or more friendly partners for Germany. And I think certainly there's, especially from Russia, is some attempts to reach out or influence German opposition. They play their own game here a bit. So I think, yeah. So what do the others think, Eugipius and Martin, on this geopolitical aspect of AfD?
I don't know about AfD in general, but it seems to me that the Russians are, in a way, they're a little bit boomer and not very interested in reaching out and trying to support protest movements abroad. So that's not really an option for AfD or for us. And really, it's a rhetorical tactic used by the elites in our own countries, by the establishment to melt or fuse all of their enemies into the same thing. So we are Russians or we are Russian sympathizers and we are the same as Vladimir Putin, and we're all part of the same anti-liberal, anti-democratic basket of deplorables. I don't really see any prospects here. I think, of course, in an ideal world, Germany would have normalized relationship with Russia. We would have Russian gas, and we would negotiate with foreign partners for our own interests. But our current political situation, our current elite make that impossible. And if that changes, then things look better for us, I guess. But otherwise, I don't really see any immediate answers here.
Mr. Zellner, any thoughts on that?
Oh, sorry. Yes,
geopolitically?
I'll mute myself. I was already talking. I think it's a complex issue. And there's another thing that's very interesting. It's a conspiracy theory right now that maybe, you know, they will flee or like charge into a war or like a declaration of a, how you call it in Germany, Verteidigungsfall, a defense situation to get the political situation under control. Because if you look at the COVID regime, and then if you have a war economy, but also a war regime in terms of information control, censorship, imprison people, you know, it gives you a lot of possibilities. And even, I think it was a real post that she quickly deleted afterwards. One of the leading politicians of the Liberal Party, she's the main war head, you know, in Germany.
Strack-Zimmermann,
Yeah, she posted, if there's a defense situation, like Germany goes to war, then election will be postponed for like forever until the war is over. So this could also be a possibility. I mean, like just have a very, very like I would say concerning thought experiment. There's a big explosion in Germany on a German arms factory. This time, obviously, it's very clear who it was, the Russians, and not like a Nord Stream. The Germans now need revenge. There's a huge media campaign by the Bild and by other medias, and then Germany joins Ukraine, and then Russia launches another missile on German territory, maybe this time a real one. It's just an experimental thought. And then Germany declares the defense situation, and then suddenly everything would be very different. It would crack down very hard on anyone who ever said a good word about Russia, because they're now part of enemy propaganda, and the law would give them all the rights. They could postpone elections. And a lot of people, like the conspiracy theorists, they think that this big crisis they want to create to make, even with all the financial troubles, the demographic troubles, everything, even the COVID backlash. We had a big leak today in Germany about their considerations and the secret talks during the pandemic. And a lot of people think that they might just yearn for a war and hope for a war situation, because then they could get rid of everything and shut down everything. That's also a thing we have to take into consideration.
It's also been argued that by some Americans, and you could call it another conspiracy theory, but it has been argued that the economic disaster that they've been developing in Germany all this time, and to a certain extent across Europe, from many different angles, from the immigration to the economic policies, and particularly energy policies, that it's all aimed at creating a situation of crisis that's overwhelming and broad enough that it allows them the opportunity to basically, give Brussels the power to do centralized taxation, and also naturally to bring in things like an EU army as well. So, one of the angles I've heard is the idea that they're just letting it all go to shit so that in that crisis moment they can affect more centralized control. Have no idea if it sounds at all plausible. I'd give you the opportunity to answer, but we're also coming up on when all of you need to go. I appreciate your patience. So if any of you wish to respond to that, please do. But at the same time, I'd ask each of you to quickly go through if there are important points that you think are missed here. In particular, if there's in particular, what do people who don't know anything about Germany or Austria, who are in the United States, Britain or Australia, etc., or God help them in Canada, what do you think we need to know? What are the points that we must understand, or that we should understand? Sort of closing thoughts from everyone. Anything that you wanted to cover as well that you didn't have a chance to thus far. Maybe start with Eugipius.
Sure. So I would say, I think, first of all, the possibility for a crisis government or a wartime regime has been significantly narrowed by the entire COVID episode. So the responsiveness of the populace to extraordinary crisis scenarios is significantly reduced by all of that. And so if that's their plan, then it's going to have to wait a few years, or they screwed up and blew their wad on something that was miscellaneous. I don't know. I don't think that there's a lot of appetite for additional crises right now. It's been one crisis after the other since COVID started. What people need to know about Germany, I don't really know. Germany is a kind of occupied colonial outpost of the global American empire. And we are sort of proving ground for political theories and ideas that are germinating in the broader leftist Anglosphere. So the energy transition, open borders politics, all of those things. We are a kind of experimental space for them, and we don't have a lot of our own political agency. So we are a secondary epiphenomenon to the broader West, I would say.
Very good. Well, thank you, Mr. Lichtmetz. Lichtmetz. Sorry.
Okay, I got it. Okay. Yeah, well, in respect to what you said about fear-mongering crisis regime, I mean, when COVID ended and it was succeeded by Ukraine crisis, I mean, I had the impression that this mode of making people scared all the time had become a habit. So now, when the virus wasn't frightful enough anymore, then it was Putin. Everybody had to be scared of. And I also noticed an uprising of climate change hysteria propaganda. It was all over. By now, I think it has gotten a bit more tired. You know, it's not as intense as perceived it during the last year. But this mode of scaring people all the time for some threat, so the government can save you. This is certainly on all the time on a certain level, a certain extent. But I would agree with you, GPS, that people are really, I mean, tired of being pressured by the state to extreme kinds of behavior or measure. So probably this wartime crisis regime won't happen too soon. So that's for that. And well, about Germany, I guess we have covered the most. It's important to
Austria.
understand.
And Austria.
Also, yeah, I mean, about Germany, we have covered that you have to understand about the psychology, the guilt complex. You also have to understand the geographics of Germany, that it's right in the middle, and it's open to each side, to the east and the west. And with Austria, we are in a position I find pretty interesting. First, I like that we are pretty small. This means that probably we can get some things better done than in Germany. Probably this is a sort of advantage, being small. And we are also, you know, classically, we are on the border between the Germanic and the Slavic people. So the more based east begins just at our border. And this is something we look at closely. Martin mentioned urbanization. So our old, you know, partner from Habsburg times, Hungary, is doing in many respects things we would rather like to have in Austria. So I think this proximity to the east does give us some perspectives people in Germany may not have to that extent. Yeah, so well, I guess much more I don't have to say, which we haven't covered today.
Mhm.
So
Well, then I will take also give my closing statement. I agree with Martin said. Very great that he said it. So I don't need to say it. Austria has higher chances because we are so small and unimportant. We don't have American nukes or anything here. So maybe the global American empire would just ignore if a change happened in Austria. Who knows? But still, I don't think that we're just an epiphenomena, and I wouldn't write off Germany in Europe so quickly. If the estimation is right that we heading for a time of crisis, this crisis will hit no one harder than Europe, and will hit no one harder than the industrial heart of Europe, which is Germany. Even in America, a crisis could never become that severe because America is huge. There's so much space and land there. America never, and food scarcity is like unimaginable in America. I think they never really starved till the beginnings, the pilgrimage days. And in Europe, all these things are, I think the potentials for that. And I think that the crisis could hit Europe so hard in a way. And we also have this huge, very, very problematic demographic ticking time bomb we're sitting on. I don't see any solution where it will not come to certain events and something will happen. Obviously, I hope for an evolution, design, a change by design, not change by disaster. But I just want to keep it like that. Something will happen in Europe in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, and it will be very substantial. Don't write Europe off. Something will happen, and I think it could turn out well in the end.
Let it be so, certainly. And I hope that is the case. I'm very, very happy to have had you all as guests. Thank you all very, very much for coming on. This is a great opportunity for people, as I said, to find out what's going on behind the curtain. Perhaps I can do something similar as regards France in future. I just don't know. I don't know the people yet. I know that Eugipius can be followed on Substack, and indeed should be. You can also follow him on Twitter, X, whatever that is these days. And I believe Eugipius also has a presence to some extent on Telegram. So I recommend everyone follow him there for God, I'm going to screw up your last name again. I'll just say Lichtmetz, so I don't, yes. So my apologies. I'm embarrassed to be speaking so poorly, and sorry to be screwing
No,
up.
don't be. It's fine. It's fine. I mean, I have to add,
Yeah.
I forgot to mention this in the beginning, that I don't have any English language content. I mean, I have a Substack site which has yet to be filled with content, and I want to post some translations there, or also some exclusive English language stuff. But this hasn't been done yet. So in order to follow me, read my stuff at Sezession, you have to read German. I'm sorry. I only occasionally appear on Anglophone channels, so some people may know
But I
me
do,
from.
I
Yeah,
do
yeah.
remember you did. Didn't you mention that at least some of your books are now the
Oh yeah,
plans are to actually translate your
the
books, right?
True, true. So the ethnopluralism book, it's not been published yet. It has been translated, but the revision of the translation is not finished yet. And also, it will feature a few chapters that are exclusively newly written. So this is not done yet, but hopefully it will finally be published this year, sometime this year. So then you'll have an English language book by Lichtmes, which you can buy and read.
Excellent. Sorry, I was just sending a thing out for the mods. Maybe they can post links for your stuff in the chat. I apologize. I did not do this beforehand, but I will. I'll put them down in the comments section once we're done here. Herr Zellner, where can people find you these days, sir?
They can find me on X. I was reactivated, and sometimes if something happens, I tweet in English. But you never know how long this will last. I think I'm afraid actually it will soon be over for several reasons. So please follow me on Telegram, Martin Zellner, English. That's how it's called there. And then I have an English Rumble channel where I sometimes post English-speaking updates about what's going on with European politics, but especially activism in Europe and the Germanosphere.
Very good. I just posted those links in the chat, and hopefully we'll get the other ones plugged in here before too long. Gentlemen, thank you all again very, very, very much. Perhaps we can do this in future again at some point, hopefully in celebration of some good news for once, rather than all the horrific shit that's happening. But we will we'll have to see. And our audience, thank you very much all for joining us. And I hope that you will follow all these guys and run down their links and connect to them, Substack, Telegram, and old-fashioned print publications as well. So with that, ladies and gents, again, my thanks to you one and all. And until next time, I am Semiagog, and I am out.